On my birthday, my mom said there wasn't enough cake for me, but made sure my sister's friend got a slice in seconds. I stayed quiet, grabbed my jacket, and walked out. They called me ungrateful. I didn't argue. I just proved them wrong by doing this. I, 32M, stood in the doorway of my childhood home, watching my mother carefully cut slices of chocolate cake and place them on paper plates. It was my birthday. The cake sitting on that kitchen counter was supposed to be mine, bought with money I'd given Mom 3 days earlier when she mentioned wanting to do something special for me this year. I'd handed her $200 and told her to get whatever she wanted. She'd smiled, hugged me, and promised it would be perfect. The living room was full of people, but none of them were my friends. My sister had invited her usual crowd, including her best friend who'd been practically living at our house for the past month. Mom was laughing with them, pouring drinks, making sure everyone was comfortable. I'd arrived late from work, still in my business clothes, expecting a small family dinner like we'd discussed. Instead, I walked into what looked like my sister's party with my name awkwardly attached to it. Mom saw me standing there and waved me over with a bright smile. She told me to sit down, that she'd bring me something to eat in a minute. I watched her serve the cake, slice after slice, to my sister's friends. The portions were generous. My sister's best friend got a particularly large piece, and when she finished it quickly, Mom cut her another without hesitation. I counted the slices. I watched the cake disappear. When most of it was gone, I approached Mom in the kitchen. I asked if I could get a piece of my birthday cake. She glanced at what remained, barely a quarter of the cake left, and her expression shifted into something uncomfortable. She said she needed to save some for Dad, who was coming home late, and some for my sister, who wanted another piece later. There wasn't really enough for me right now, she explained, but maybe tomorrow there would be leftovers. I stood there processing her words. My sister's friend walked past us into the kitchen, empty plate in hand, and asked if there was any more cake. Mom immediately smiled and told her of course, cutting a slice from the remaining portion. I watched this happen 2 feet away from me. The friend thanked her and walked back to the living room. Something cold settled in my chest. Mom turned back to me and suggested I grab some chips from the pantry if I was hungry. She said it so casually, as if this made perfect sense, as if I should understand. I asked her why my sister's friend got seconds, but I couldn't have firsts. Mom's face tightened. She told me not to be difficult, that there were guests to think about, that I was being selfish on a day that should be about bringing family together. I looked past her into the living room where my sister was laughing loudly with her friends, none of whom had acknowledged me beyond brief nods when I arrived. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened, I realized. This was just the first time the symbolism was so painfully clear. I was always the afterthought, the one who could wait, the one who would understand. I grabbed my jacket from the coat rack. Mom asked where I was going, her voice taking on that sharp edge she used when she thought I was being unreasonable. I told her I was leaving. She said I was being ungrateful, that she'd worked hard to put this together, that I was ruining the evening by making it about myself. My sister appeared in the doorway and called me dramatic. Some of her friends were watching now, whispering. I didn't argue. I just walked out the front door and got in my car. My phone started buzzing before I'd even left the driveway. Messages from Mom saying I'd embarrassed her. Messages from my sister calling me childish. I turned off my phone and drove. The thing about being treated as secondary your whole life is that you start to accept it as normal. You make excuses. You tell yourself they don't mean it that way. You convince yourself you're being too sensitive. But eventually, something breaks through the fog of justifications, and you see the pattern clearly. That night, sitting in my car outside a closed coffee shop, I saw 32 years of patterns. I thought about every birthday where my gifts were clearly afterthoughts compared to my sister's carefully chosen presents. Every family dinner where my achievements were acknowledged with brief nods, while her mediocre accomplishments were celebrated extensively. Every time I was expected to be understanding, flexible, mature, while she was allowed to be demanding and temperamental. The golden child and the forgotten child. Tale as old as time. I made a decision that night. I wasn't going to argue or complain or try to make them see what they'd done. I was simply going to remove myself from the equation and see what happened when I stopped being the one who always accommodated everyone else. The next morning, I started making changes. I'd been living in a small apartment across town, but I'd been saving for years to buy a house. I'd put that plan on hold multiple times because family always needed something. Mom needed help with repairs. My sister needed a loan for her car. Dad needed money for his business idea. I'd given it all willingly, telling myself family came first. My savings had grown slowly because it kept getting redistributed. I contacted a real estate agent that week. I had enough for a down payment on a modest place if I stopped treating my account as a family fund. Within 3 weeks, I'd found a small house on the other side of the city, nearly an hour away from my parents. It needed work, but it was mine. I didn't tell them I was moving. I hired movers and transferred everything in one day while they thought I was at work. I changed my phone number and only gave the new one to a few trusted friends and my employer. I blocked my family on all social media. I disappeared from their lives as completely as someone can in the modern age. The reaction, I later learned from a mutual friend, was explosive. Mom called my workplace demanding to speak to me. My sister drove to my old apartment and harassed my former neighbors asking where I'd gone. Dad sent emails to my old account that piled up unread. They filed a missing persons report, which was dismissed when I confirmed to the police that I was fine and had left by choice. 6 months passed. I threw myself into fixing up my house and advancing my career. Without the constant drain of family obligations and emergency loans, I got a promotion at work. I started dating someone I'd met through a friend, someone who had no connection to my old life. I joined a gym and actually had time to go regularly. I read books. I traveled on weekends. I discovered I actually enjoyed my own company when it wasn't weighed down by resentment and obligation. The mutual friend who told me about my family's reaction eventually gave them my new number. I didn't blame her. She'd been put in an awkward position. The calls and messages started immediately. Mom wanted to know how I could do this to her, how I could throw away family over something so trivial as cake. My sister said I was tearing the family apart with my tantrum. Dad, surprisingly, just asked if I was okay, but even his message was followed by one saying Mom was devastated and I needed to fix this. I responded to Dad only. I told him I was better than I'd been in years, that I'd realized I'd spent my entire life trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided I was less important than my sister, and I was done trying. I said I wasn't angry. I'd simply accepted reality and acted accordingly. He read the message but never replied. A year after I walked out of that birthday party, Mom showed up at my workplace. Security called me down to the lobby where she was demanding to see me. She looked older, tired. She said we needed to talk, that this had gone on long enough, that I needed to come home and work this out like an adult. I asked her what there was to work out. She seemed confused by the question. I clarified. I asked if she understood why I'd left. She said yes, that I'd gotten upset about the cake, but that was no reason to cut off my entire family for a year. I asked if she remembered it was my birthday. She said of course she did. I asked if she remembered it was my cake, bought with my money. She said she remembered, but there were guests to consider. There it was. Even a year later, she couldn't see it. I asked her if she'd ever cut my sister's friend a second piece of cake at my sister's birthday while telling my sister there wasn't enough for her. Mom said that was different. I asked how. She couldn't answer that, at least not in a way that didn't expose the fundamental inequality she'd always maintained. I told her I wasn't coming back. I said I'd build a life without them, a good life, and I didn't need the dysfunction anymore. She started crying, saying I was breaking her heart, that family was supposed to forgive and forget. I said forgiveness required acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and she'd just proven she didn't think she'd done anything wrong. She just wanted things to go back to normal, which meant me accepting my designated role as the accommodating, understanding, invisible son. She asked what she could do to fix this. I told her the truth. She could start by telling me honestly what my position in the family was compared to my sister's. She could acknowledge the decades of differential treatment. She could explain why my feelings and needs always came second. She could do the uncomfortable work of examining her own behavior instead of demanding I get over mine. She said I was being cruel. I said I was being honest, and if honesty felt like cruelty, that told her everything she needed to know. I walked back upstairs to my office. Security escorted her out. She called me several times that day. I didn't answer. My sister reached out 2 months after that through a coworker of mine. The coworker awkwardly handed me a letter in the break room. My sister had written 3 pages about how I destroyed our family, how Mom cried constantly, how Dad had become withdrawn, how Thanksgiving and Christmas had been miserable without me. Every sentence was about their pain, their loss, their difficulty. Not once did she acknowledge what had led to this point. Not once did she consider my perspective. The letter ended with an ultimatum. I needed to apologize and come back, or she would consider me permanently out of the family. As if I hadn't already made that choice. As if her permission mattered. I threw the letter away without responding. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dad showed up at my house on a Saturday morning. I almost didn't answer the door, but something made me open it. He stood on my porch looking uncomfortable, holding a bag from a local bakery. He asked if he could come in. I let him, mostly out of curiosity. We sat in my living room, and he placed the bakery bag on the coffee table. He said he'd bought a cake, chocolate like the one from that birthday, and he thought maybe we could talk. I asked him why he was here. He said he'd spent the last year and a half thinking about what I'd said in my message. He'd started noticing things he'd been blind to before. The way Mom's face lit up differently when my sister entered a room versus when I did. The way family decisions were made around my sister's preferences while mine were considered flexible. The way money flowed in the family, always from me and to everyone else. He said he'd tried to talk to Mom about it. She'd gotten defensive, said he was taking my side, said I'd poisoned him against his own family. That reaction, he said, had made him realize I was right. He apologized, not just for the birthday, but for 32 years of not protecting me from the favoritism I'd grown up swimming in. I didn't know what to say. He opened the bakery bag and pulled out a small cake with candles. He said he knew it was late, way too late, but he wanted to celebrate my birthday properly for once. Just the two of us, if I'd let him. No sister, no mom, no distractions. Just him acknowledging me. We ate cake together in silence for a while. Then he asked about my life, my house, my job. Really asked, with genuine interest, staying for 3 hours and listening to everything I told him. When he left, he hugged me tightly and said he understood if I never wanted to see any of them again, but his door would always be open if I ever wanted a relationship with just him. After that, Dad and I started having coffee every few weeks. Just us. He never pushed me to reconcile with Mom or my sister. He never made excuses for them. He just showed up consistently, proving through actions that I mattered to him. It was something, at least. Update 1. 2 years after I walked out of that birthday party, my sister got engaged. Dad mentioned it during one of our coffee meetings, carefully neutral, not pushing. He said the wedding would be in 6 months and that they wanted me there. I told him I'd think about it. The invitation arrived by mail, formal and expensive. My name was on it. No +1 indicated, even though I'd been with my girlfriend for over a year. The RSVP date came and went. I didn't respond. Mom called from a number I didn't have blocked. She said it was important that I be there for my sister's big day, that family needed to come together for important moments, that enough time had passed. I asked if my girlfriend was invited. Mom hesitated and said the guest list was very tight, mostly family. I pointed out that my sister's best friend, the one who'd gotten my cake, was surely invited with her husband. Mom said that was different. She was practically family. I told Mom I wouldn't be attending. She said I was being petty, that I was punishing my sister for something that was between me and Mom. I said my sister had called me dramatic and supported Mom that night, and every day since by refusing to acknowledge what had happened. My absence was a natural consequence, not a punishment. The wedding happened without me. Dad sent me a photo from the reception, just of him, with a text saying he'd wished I was there, but understood why I wasn't. In the background of the photo, I could see the cake table. 3 elaborate tiers covered in flowers. I wondered if everyone got a piece. A few months after the wedding, my girlfriend and I got engaged. We planned a small ceremony, just close friends and her family. I didn't send an invitation to my mother or sister. I did invite Dad, making clear he was welcome alone or not at all. He came alone, wearing a new suit, and walked me down the aisle since we'd decided to forego traditional gender roles. Mom found out through social media posts from my wife's family. The angry voicemails started immediately. Update 2. 3 years after the birthday incident, Dad called me with his voice shaking. He'd been diagnosed with early-stage cancer. Treatable, the doctors said, but scary nonetheless. He wanted me to know, and he wanted to ask if I'd visit him during treatment. I visited him in the hospital after his surgery. Mom was there, and my sister. We existed in the same room politely, like strangers in an elevator. They didn't try to start anything with Dad recovering nearby. I stayed for an hour, holding Dad's hand, before leaving. Over the next few months, I drove Dad to several appointments while Mom and my sister were busy. We had long conversations in waiting rooms about regret and time and family. He told me he'd been talking to a therapist about his role in the family dynamics, trying to understand how he'd allowed things to get so unbalanced. He said he'd been a coward, always choosing the path of least resistance, which meant placating Mom and my sister while expecting me to be endlessly understanding. I told him I'd forgiven him, not because he'd fixed everything, but because he'd done the work to acknowledge it and change his behavior toward me. That was more than Mom or my sister had ever offered. Dad recovered fully. During his last treatment session, he told me he'd updated his will. He'd split everything 50-50 between my sister and me, but he'd also set up a trust that couldn't be touched by Mom, ensuring my portion would actually reach me. He said he knew Mom would fight it, but he'd been clear with his lawyer. He wanted me to have what was fairly mine. I thanked him, but told him I didn't need his money. I'd built my life without family support, and I was doing well. He said he knew, that he was proud of me, but this wasn't about need. It was about equity and acknowledgement. It was his way of saying on paper what he'd been trying to show in actions, that I was equally his child and deserved equal consideration. Update 3. 5 years after the birthday party, my wife and I had our first child, a son. We named him after my wife's late father. I sent Dad a photo from the hospital. He came to visit the next day, alone, bringing gifts and tears of joy. He asked if Mom could visit too. I said no. He nodded, said he understood, and didn't push. He held his grandson and told me I was going to be a great father because I'd learned what not to do. Mom sent gifts to our house, packages left on the porch. I donated them all to charity. She sent cards on the baby's monthly birthdays. I recycled them without opening them. My sister sent a text saying she hoped I was happy, destroying the family and denying Mom her grandchild. I blocked the number. The truth was, I was happy, genuinely happy. My life was full of people who valued me, who showed up for me, who didn't rank me second in importance. I had a wife who fought for me, friends who celebrated me, a father who'd learned to see me. I had a career I'd advanced in without constant interruptions for family emergencies that were never really emergencies. I had a son who would grow up knowing his worth wasn't conditional on comparison to a sibling. At my son's first birthday party, surrounded by our chosen family, I watched my wife cut the cake. She handed me the first slice without thinking about it, natural as breathing. That's when I realized how far I'd come from that night 5 years ago when I'd walked out of my childhood home. I'd spent 32 years in a family that made me feel invisible. I'd spent 5 years building a life where I was seen. Dad pulled me aside during the party and told me he was proud of who I'd become. I told him I was proud of who he'd become too. He laughed and said he was just learning to be who he should have been all along. As the party wound down and guests started leaving, I found myself thinking about Mom and my sister. I didn't hate them. I didn't waste energy on anger anymore. I simply didn't need them. They'd had countless chances to choose me, to see me, to value me. They'd chosen not to every single time. I'd proven them wrong in the best way possible, not by confronting them or making them acknowledge their mistakes, but by building a life so full and successful without them that their absence didn't create a void. It created space for better things. My son will never know what it feels like to be the afterthought child. That cycle ends with me. And maybe that's the best revenge of all.